while he's doing that, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Fermin Alcasena. And I was admitting the other day that I sort of influenced the choice of these webinars. Dr. Alcasena's research was really fascinating to me, so I'm really excited about today's webinar. He's a researcher with a Master's of Science in Wildland Fire Science and Integrative Management, as well as a PhD in Forest and Environmental Management from the University of Lleida in Barcelona, Spain. Currently, Fermin's main research focus relates to wildfire risk assessment and fuel treatment design in forest ecosystems, today's topic, so this is really a main thrust for him. But he's been involved in public forest management in Spain and has worked for harvesting operations as a manager, worked with logging companies, and so he has a broad background. Fermin is currently conducting research at Oregon State University through the USDA Forest Service International Visitor Program. So good example of how we can pull some great minds from other places in the world. And with that, Fermin, the floor is yours, and we can see your first slide, so we're ready for you to take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, you're sounding good, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for inviting me to share with you today some of the results. And well, I would like to start to first giving thanks to the International Visitor Program and the USDA Forest Service for funding my stay here in the US. And here you only see my name, but this is a group that we work together in Corvallis under the supervision of Alan Ager. And in this case study, we just want to find and understand how much do we need to treat on the landscape to reduce expected annual loss in one structure. For that purpose, we combine simulation modeling, structure susceptibility models, then we use treatment optimization models to design landscape field treatments, and then we rerun the fire spread models as well as the susceptibility models to estimate the risk, the difference, and the risk reduction. So first, a very quick introduction about wildfires in the wildland-urban interface. Extreme fires that escape from initial attack continue to burn communities in the western US, and these wildfires expose between 8 to 10,000 structures per year, depending on the time frame that we are considering. This is closer to 10 to 8 or 10,000. Most of exposure is concentrated in California, but recent trends highlight an increasing exposure during the catastrophic events between 2017 to 2020. At this point, we require operational solutions to inform long-term risk management plans and better coexist with fire. Overall, we have two main options. The first is promoting active forest management in strategic locations to restrict large fire spread. With this management option, we are reducing overall burn probability at a landscape scale, and then we are attempting to generate fire-adapted communities resistant to catastrophic events. To generate these fire-resistant communities, we basically focus on reducing hazard on the home ignition zone and reduce structure susceptibility. We have here two different strategies, but both of them can be combined together to reduce wildfire risk, and this is what we are doing in this case study. In addition, the collaborative planning efforts are essential to articulate management plans in complex land tenures. Since we have individual homeowners, communities, and big land tenures. In this slide, I just want to summarize some key concepts that we have been implementing in this case study. Given a landscape like this, where we have a human community, every housing unit has a home ignition zone. The home ignition zone is the buffer area around each structure. And here we have some big fires spreading for a really long distance and exposing communities on 3 different ways: as a surface fire, as a house-to-house transmission, or as a showering ember. So these are the 3 options to expose the different structures. And the transmission concept is just the intersection between the fire perimeters and the location of the housing units. And we attribute the number of exposed structures to the fire ignition location. In this specific case, we have a fire ignition close to a road, probably caused by humans, where the number of exposed structures is 9. So we attribute the number of structures to the ignition location. But we may have also some lightning fires and other fires with different transmission values. This will depend on the fire weather conditions, duration, and all these fires exposing the structures in the community locate and concentrate in the community fireshed. Here, on top of it, we have different lanternal systems that will be conditioning our management efforts. This is just one example where we have U.S. Forest Service lands, BLM, and private lands. And 3 different scales. We have firesheds, human communities, and the home ignition zone. Concerning the risk management options, we have ignition prevention. We are not covering this in the study. And the other main 2 are the landscape field treatments and the community planning. In this study, we will design the combination of landscape field treatments plus field treatments on the home ignition zone, which is a part of the community planning, as a strategy to mitigate risk. I need to say also on top of it that the safe efficient suppression is another strategy for reducing risk, but this was not covered in this study. The study area locates in central Idaho, which is about 1.4 million hectares, and we have 20 communities in total. Here you see that the dominant land tenures are the U.S. Forest Service lands, private lands, and BLM. If we look at historic fires, we see that the largest fires locate on the eastern part of the study area, while the western plains have less number of large fires. The general workflow of this study has 4 main steps. We first generated the community zone mapping. We delineated the communities using a 45-minute drive time criteria. Then, after the creation of the community zones, we mapped the structural locations inside communities as well as the home ignition zone clusters. Then, we implemented the wildfire risk assessment classic framework of Mark Finney to assess wildfire risk at the structure level. For that purpose, we combine fire spread modeling with a structure level susceptibility models to assess the annual number of structures lost in the study area. Then we used a treatment optimization tool, Forces, developed by Alan Ager, to design the landscape field treatment allocation. Here, we first delineate the extent of the study area, which is the fireshed. We then set which are the most convenient type of treatments, depending on if we locate them on the landscape or the home ignition zone, as well as the rotation period. Then we can set as well some constraints and operational limitations to exclude some areas for treatment. And the outcome, the result from the optimization, is a mosaic. It's a mosaic with a treatment allocation. And number 4, we assess the cost efficiency. We compare the difference between current conditions and the managed landscape in order to understand how much do we need to treat to mitigate risk in one housing unit. In addition, we can also assess how much do we need to invest in US dollars. I'm talking about field treatments. How much do we need to invest to mitigate risk in one housing unit as a reference metric to really understand which is the risk mitigation that we are implementing. First, community extent. We use the 45-minute drive time from the core, from the census blocks cores to delineate the polygons. We got 20 communities in this study area. These methods accounted for road speed to estimate the drive time distance. And here in this figure, I'm just showing you one example for McCall where we have the road network and how far can we go in 45 minutes. So the red polygon is the 45-minute drive time polygon for this community. And this was done for the over 19 communities in the study area to delineate the 20 community zones. Then we allocated structure footprints within communities. We used footprint centroids. This information is available now in OpenStreetMaps as well as Microsoft Footprints. And we got 63,707 structures in the 20 communities plus the gaps in between communities, some few gaps. And then finally, we created the home ignition zone clusters implementing the 200 feet buffer to every footprint. And this is how the clusters look like, where we have different densities and aggregation patterns in the landscape. Then we implemented the risk assessment framework. This is the classic risk assessment framework by Mark Finney, where the risk is the expectation of loss or benefit by definition, but the fire is not going to provide a benefit, so we just consider the loss. And units are number of structures lost per year. And this was obtained as a result of the burn probability, or how likely will a given structure get burned in a year, times the consequences. What happens if the structure gets burned? Now in the next slides, I will give you some few details about these two separate blocks. And this was done at the structure level. So we estimated the percentage loss for every housing unit, and then we summarize these results by community to provide a good estimate and understand which is the total risk in this study area and how the spatial gradients change from community to community in the study area. The first component is the burn probability. We use the annual burn probability, which is essentially the number of times a given valued asset is exposed on average per year. So how often is every structure burned per year? And here, as we have seen in the first slides, the wildfire can reach a given structure on different ways. It can reach a surface fire, which is the perimeter. It can reach as a showering ember. These both components were integrated in this study to estimate the annual burn probability. And we have as well a third component, which is the house-to-house transmission. This third component was integrated in the second block in the susceptibility models as a home ignition zone variable. And as you all know, we can use wildfire simulation modeling to predict fire perimeters, wildfire spread, and behavior in large landscapes. Just some few notes related to the wildfire simulation modeling framework that we have been implementing here in this study. We use the minimal travel time algorithm as implemented in FConst to model a burn area equivalent to more than 10,000 years at 60-meter resolution. Fires were modeled by fire regime macro area or PIROM, accounting for existing differences in weather conditions as well as fire load. We subdivided the study area in different macro areas and blocks, and we separately modeled fire spread and behavior in every macro area, PIROM, or block, accounting for the local weather conditions. We assume extreme fire weather conditions since the largest fires account for most of the burn area. The fire ignitions were derived based on historic patterns. We used historic fire ignitions to generate a fire ignition density and display the ignition inputs based on this historic pattern. Model fire replicated the historic fire size distribution. We calibrated the fire spread model based on the incident command system report daily progressions. And the main outputs included fire perimeters, the burn probability, and landing embers. Just a very quick overview of the fire spread calibration with some few more details. Here in this figure, we have the ignition density grid. This was generated using the historic ignitions from current short database. And this was used to display, to allocate ignitions inside the fire modeling domain. As you can see here, we consider a 20-kilometer buffer to the communities in order to capture the fires that ignite outside of communities and expose the housing units inside them. And we divided the study area in 4 blocks on 4 macro areas. And every macro area had particular conditions in terms of fire spread, duration, and weather. Most weather conditions in the wind rows, we can see that here in this study area, the dominant winds come from the southwest or west-southwest. And just to show you the plot, the comparison between the actual and modeled fires, and here just to compare and see that we are really replicating the historic distribution, and we are obtaining a realistic burn patterns on the landscape. Therefore, this is what we obtained, the annual burn probability, but we combine here surface fire showing embers. On the one hand, we have the perimeter overlap. This is the obtained from the raster. And then we have the ember exposure, how often a pixel is burned divided by the number of seasons. And we saw that almost always the burn probability was higher than the ember exposure, except from some few pixels located on the wilderness boundaries, some non-burnable pixels located on the wilderness boundaries where the surface fire was not burning there because the fuels were non-burnable, but some showering embers were exposing the structural communities located in these non-burnable edge contour areas. So we combined both surface fire showing embers into the annual burn probability as the number of times a pixel gets burned divided by the number of modeled years or seasons. And then we have the susceptibility block. The first was the probability, the second is the susceptibility. And here we all know that the conditions in the home ignition zone explain to a great extent the housing loss probability. And some previous studies, some previous authors created really interesting models based on empiric loss data to generate susceptibility, to generate the models to predict the loss. In this study, we used the model from Alexander et al. And the main variables of these models include overall the hazardous fuels cover in the home ignition zone, structure density, nearest structure distance. Here, I want to emphasize that this captures to some extent the house-to-house fire transmission. We were not considering this in the burn probability, but this is somehow integrated into the framework in the susceptibility model. Then we have the raw density and topographic position too. And here the interesting point is that since we have accurate housing locations, we can delineate accurate home ignition zone areas and extract the geospatial available data for the home ignition zone to provide really accurate structure level risk assessments. So this is just assuming a close-up view for a portion of the landscape where we have structure centroids, these red spots, and the home ignition zone area where we have a very changing and different gradient all across the landscape with different clusters in terms of size, structure density, road density, hazardous fuels percentage covered, and other variables. And combining, therefore, probability times consequences, the consequences implementing these previous models, we assess risk for every housing unit. And this is the previous figure where we have the risk for every housing unit. And we have a really interesting pattern here. We were expecting this, where the higher loss is in the lower loss is in the core, where the road density is higher, where the burn probability is lower, where the structure density is higher, the road density is higher, and the hazardous fuels cover is lower too. So this analysis captures really accurately for every structure on the landscape, which is the expected annual loss. These values change a little bit because this is the result from really the very first assessment, and the last update provided some slower values, but the pattern that this figure is showing is the same. And this is capturing really accurately how the risk is changing from house to house. This information can be also summarized in community maps. In this specific case, just for visualization reasons, we use the HexNet, 20-hectare HexNet, and the total exposure and total loss in the HexNet. And this is really interesting because here you see that the patterns are really similar, but not the same, not the same. We will later see the numbers. So this is one way of providing the outputs to the landscape manager. I believe this is the most, probably one of the most useful ways to really understand really fast where is the exposure and risk concentrated in our communities. And then if we go back to the land tenure system transmission, we finish now with risk. Here I want to share with you some few slides relative to wildfire transmission and how much fire is coming from the different land tenures. Here you see that most fire is coming from private lands, U.S. Forest Service contributing about to the 15%, and it was a really large area, as you will see later in the figure. And the interesting point, just the thing to take into account, that not all the land is manageable. We have some protected lands where we cannot implement any treatment. So this should be also considered in the analysis to understand to what extent can we reduce risk, transmission from the different land tenures. If we summarize transmission by pad block, the pads are the polygons relative to the different land tenures. This is providing a really interesting output where we can see some big blocks accounting for the bulk of wildfire transmission. Here you have a map on the right side with the main roads, and you see that the blocks with most transmission concentrate following the state highways, and some of them present values especially high in particular, right? This is really interesting too, because this can be used for landscape managers to prioritize as a planning areas. These blocks can be used as a planning areas to prioritize landscape field treatment implementation. Now, I am going to explain you the main highlights relative to the field treatment design. This is going to be an overview. You have really good papers already published giving further details. We first delineated the extent of the planning area. We delineated the community fireshed to understand where do we need to concentrate our landscape field treatments. Then we set the treatment prescriptions. In this study, we consider the thinning plus the underburn or mastication. The underburn or prescribed fire was considered for the landscape field treatments, but we consider mastication for the whole ignition zone, because you already know that we have more constraints in terms of smoke and other constraints in the home ignition zone that make more complicated to implement prescribed fire, and therefore we consider mastication in the home ignition zone. We implemented the 4C6 optimization tool developed by Alan Ager, and it was called the Landscape Treatment Designer initially. Now it's called 4C6, and this will be available very soon. And here we need to understand first which are the objectives, why are we treating, and we had two objectives here. The first one was to reduce transmission to the wildland-urban interface, and the second was to reduce hazard in the home ignition zone. And in this software, we need to understand that the program will prioritize based on a metric for every objective. Therefore, we need to find and associate a metric to every objective for the prioritization. We have some constraints. We excluded protected lands and also slopes higher than 60%. In terms of fuel treatments, we treated only the forest fuels. The management area was the 20%. This is an effective intensity to achieve substantial reductions in the burn probability. It will depend on the landscape, of course, but it's between 18 to 25%. You can check some previous papers of Marfini and Alan Ager, and this is why I use the 20%. Treatment units or stands in this study were more than 142,000. The average fire size was 20 hectares for every stand, and every stand was populated with all this previous information relative to the different metrics for the objectives, if the different stands are protected or not. We use a flag here, and then if the stand is mostly covered by forest fuels, where we implement the treatments, or other kind of fuels which have been excluded from this treatment optimization, such as grasslands. And the result is a field treatment mosaic. We selected the stands. It's a shapefile where we know where are we treating. And then using this shapefile, we edit the landscape fuel and we run FCons for the matched scenario. So in this case, we use the LTD to get the treatment mosaic and to understand where are we implementing treatments so that we can edit, change the landscape file. We change the surface fuels, we change the canopy cover because we reduce the canopy cover to 50%, we reduce the canopy bulk density to 0.10 kilograms per cubic meter, and we increase the canopy base height to 3.5 meters. So we are changing the landscape file and rerunning FCons, we're running fire spread and behavior models for the managed scenario. I am going to emphasize here a little more about the prioritization metrics, because the FORCES program provides the optimal solution, maximizing the objective attainment based on a metric value, based on stand level metric values. And here in this study, we use a metric called a wildfire transmission index to target the high transmission stands. And this metric, this grid, was generated as a grid, was estimated as the annual ignition density. The previous grid I showed you, the same grid that we used to allocate fire ignitions, and the conditional wildfire transmission for the 90% for the 90% fire size. Okay. For the conditional wildfire transmission for the fire size threshold accounting 90% of exposure. In this study area was 7,260 hectares. This means that all the fires with a burn area lower than this threshold accounted for the 90% of annual exposure in the study area. We have here the ignition density to understand which are the areas where the ignitions will likely locate in the future. And then we have the conditional transmission at pixel level for this specific fire size to understand how many housing units are exposed given a fire of 7,260 hectares. In order to reduce hazard in the home ignition zone, we treated all fuels because this was not representing a substantial area in the study area, and therefore we treat them all. Okay, so this is the chart where we have the cumulative transmission. We took the transmission for all the fires and calculated the cumulative transmission. We first ranked all of them based on the fire size, and from this chart, we obtained that all the fires till 7,260 areas account for the 90% of cumulative transmission. Using the fire ignition locations attributed with the number of exposed housing units, this is the output. This is the transmission output. We have a point file. Using a smoothing technique, we generated the conditional fire transmission. This is the number of housing units exposed given a fire of 7,260 hectares in the pixel. And to obtain the transmission index, we just multiplied this conditional transmission with the previous ignition density to capture both the spatial pattern of fire ignitions as well as the conditional exposure from fires igniting in every pixel. And from the transmission index, we delineated the firesheds. We can use this spatial gradient. We can use the gradient from the transmission index and the transmission values and the point file to understand the community fireshed transmission, to delineate the fireshed and how the transmission is changed inside the fireshed. Here we see that most transmission is highly clustered and aggregated, and in this specific case, we had that the bulk of transmission, more than 80%, was concentrated in just 50% of the area. So here the ultimate goal is understanding where do we need to go treat on the landscape. And this is clearly pointing at some big clusters where we should prioritize the treatments. Okay. And this is the result. So we use these metrics to prioritize the treatments. We obtain the treatment mosaic from the LTD, from the 4Cs or the previous LTD. And this is the result, where we have a very strong cluster for the treatments that reduce transmission. This is in red. And then we have as well some the home ignition zone areas where we are treating to reduce the hazard in communities. This active forest management area is about 77,000 hectares, and considering an 8-year rotation period, this could be divided in 8 projects of about 9,723 hectares per year. Here, the idea is that we concentrate our landscape treatments on the areas with the higher transmission, and this area is the active forest management area, where we are constantly treating the landscape to keep this with low transmission values and prevent and mitigate exposure in the communities. We also had some thinning volume data. Here in this figure, you can see which is the merchantable thinning volume from thinning from below. We are not doing any clear cut. We are not cutting any protected areas, and we are respecting the old growth. So this is the thinning volume from a thinning from below. And this is interesting because understanding how much timber volume we obtain from a thinning from below, we can assess and we can calculate how much can the thinning volume cover the treatment cost. And this is what we did. We used this information on treated areas to see which was the revenue from thinning in order to estimate the cost efficiency. Treatment cost, this is going to be a very quick summary with the main highlights and data. We had 2 treatment types, treatments for mastication in the home ignition zone and prescribed fires. In the landscape treatments, you can see that the price is substantially different. We have a total cost of more than $12 million per year on treatments. And concerning the thinning revenue, we had a total volume of 12,029 MBF per year. And if we consider a reference price of $148.5 per MBF, we get that on average every year we will be obtaining a revenue of $1.7 million on treated areas. And from this we can get the cost efficiency Okay, I will show you later the results relative to the burn probability reduction and risk reduction, but we obtained that treating 570 acres per year in the landscape and the home ignition zone, we were saving one structure. We were reducing the expected annual loss in one structure. And including the thinning revenue, this was representing a cost of $192,000 US. This is just a reference value because you know that changing and tweaking and fine tuning the treatment cost and the stumpage, sale price, the timber value, these may change, but the reference result was is pretty valid to understand how much do we need to treat to save one house and which is the cost in terms of landscape retreatments for reducing the risk in one unit. And some preliminary results. Number of structures, 63,707. If we look at the current conditions, we have this burn probability. We compare the burn probability between just considering surface fire and the combination between surface fire and embers, and the result did not change very substantially. We also had the structure level average conditional loss, which is the fire effect given a fire burns the structure. And it was about, this is a loss rate, this is called loss rate in some papers, and it was about 23.5%. Then we have the expected loss, which is way lower because it's the probability times consequences, so it goes down a lot. And then we had in total 210.15 structures per year exposed in the 20 communities. This was for surface fire. For embers, just one more, not a substantial difference. And 82.28 structures per year lost in the 20 communities. So these were the current conditions. And then after implementing the treatments, we obtained that the burn probability was reduced really substantially. The conditional loss was lower because we were treating in the home ignition zone too. And exposed structures were reduced dramatically from 211 to 125, and the loss was reduced from 82 to 28. This is a quick summary. This was also estimated by community. And here I just want to emphasize some really interesting findings, because if we look at, for instance, McCall, which is the community with the highest exposure with 29 structures per year, we have a loss of when we convert exposure to risk, we have a loss to 17. But then we have another community with a high exposure like Council, but a much lower risk. So here we can understand which is the role of the fuel treatments in the home, which is the role of the factors describing the conditional loss, because there's not a direct correlation between exposure and risk, and this will depend on the local conditions for the home ignition zone. For instance, just one more example, if you compare Council with New Meadows, both have almost same risk, 7.27 and 7.49. But if you look at exposure, the first has 20.20 structures per year and the second has 14. So this means from the interpretation of the results that here in New Meadows, the conditional loss was way higher because most structures were located deeper into the wilderness areas. Okay, just these key highlights and concluding remarks to finish with the presentation. First, we implemented a quantitative assessment framework to estimate the wildfire risk to communities in terms of the number of structures lost. This was presented at structure level. We can go to the detail and understand which is the expected loss for every housing unit. Of course, will depend on assumptions, and this can be fine-tuned with local conditions if you have more accurate data. We provided a fuel treatment allocation design. This was obtained with the forces fuel treatment optimization model, aimed at reducing transmission to the well-urban interface and hazard in the home ignition zone. These results were presented in operational maps. The forces outputs can be easily used and integrated into field treatment projects because it's easy to create maps and show the treatment allocation to landscape managers. Number 3, reduce, this is the core, well, the summary of the whole study. We found that the risk was reduced in one structure when we were treating 570 acres on the landscape. Here, of course, this is an assumption for this study. We assumed a rotation of a year, and the area under management is constantly treated to keep the fuel load low. And we also had some thinning volume results and use this information to really understand to what extent is the thinning covering the cost of the fuel treatment. And it was about, on average, the 14%. So that's it. This is the reference list. And I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention, and feel totally free to make any question you have, and just please go ahead. Don't be shy.
Thank you so much, Fermin. That was great. Really, you covered a lot of pretty complex modeling in a concise and clear manner, so thank you. Well, we're waiting for folks to ask questions in the chat window. Oh yeah, and somebody asked, Giuseppe asked if you could go back to the list of references.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And then I actually had a question to start out, and hopefully
I can give you more references. This is just a very short list, okay? If you want more details about any specific point or detail, I can give you many more references.
Great. And my question was about, it seemed in the list of communities where you were discussing some of the differences between exposure and risk, I also noticed differences in burn probability with and without ember, or maybe that's, yeah. And I wonder if those are real or whether they're too small to be important, and if they are important, what you think might be some of the drivers.
So my point of view here is that you can calibrate the burn probability, okay, because you replicate historic fire size distributions, and therefore you are obtaining realistic estimates. The ember exposure point, it's way more complicated. It's way more complicated because it depends on many more factors. Here we just did an effort to integrate this information. And we are doing this. This is still substantial work in progress to better understand this, but we are doing this because using fire spread models, you cannot burn, obviously, the non-burnable fuels where you have structures, but sometimes the structures located on the edge, on the non-vulnerable fuels, get exposed from embers. So here, my intention was to try to capture exposure in housing units located on non-vulnerable fuels close to the wilderness edge of the community. So burn probability, you can calibrate it. You will be pretty accurate and you can rely 100% on these results. The ember exposure is a must, it's a plus, it's a complement, okay? And this will be sometimes increased exposure if you have many non-vulnerable pixels in between wildland-urban interface areas where exposure is coming from showering embers.
Great, thank you. I think that's a really important point. Other folks have questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself if that's easier, but you can also type things in the chat window. And Marty Witter asks, how did you model ember exposure?
Okay, ember exposure, it's integrated into fconst, and you have two options. There's a model by Finney and there's another one by Scott. And it's pretty complicated issue, relies on two these models. The program is giving you the landing locations, and using the ember landing locations, you can assess ember exposure. Here, and this is true, I don't know yet the way of trying to calibrate ember exposure. You may be able, this is one way, you may be able of trying to replicate historic extreme large fires to see to what extent the landing embers capture the reality, but it's still a lot of research going on to get accurate estimates. So you get the landing locations. This is an option provided by fconst model, and you use these landing locations to obtain the ember exposure.
Great, thank you. Michelle asks a couple of questions, two questions. Do you think that this methodology could be extended to Mediterranean Marquise areas? Maybe we'll just start with that one.
Okay, I will give you my opinion, right? From Spain, I have a different perspective sometimes. So if we have a Mediterranean maquis trying to masticate and burn all the time, the maquis may not be a good option, because it will going to resprout once and again and once and again. So you masticate, it will resprout. In my opinion, you need to consider other options, including grazing, goats, sheep, and herbivores to keep the maquis with low fuel loads. Of course, masticate around the home ignition zone, but be really selective when you masticate. Do not do a systematic mastication. Respect the big trees, the big oak trees, and try to masticate just shrubs. Doing that, you are preventing strong resprouting for these big trees that really often are systematically masticated. So I think this can be implemented in Mediterranean conditions, but you need to change the fuel treatment types. You need to adjust the treatment type to the species ecology. And for the maquis, in my opinion, is selective mastication, respect the big trees. You can maybe combine it with a low pruning and introduce goats, sheep, essentially to keep the shrublands under control. So yes, but different kind of treatments. Not the same, not this systematic mastication or prescribed fire approach.
That makes sense. I think those are similar questions people ask about chaparral in say, California.
Yeah, it's different.
Michelle also asks, regarding the home ignition zone is 200 meters, a standard threshold used in the United States studies. For similar work, they're using different lower values.
So the reference of the home ignition zone is COIN 2008, and it goes between, it's at the very beginning, it's 30 to 60 meters buffer. Depending on different studies, this will change, of course. But for this very specific case study, I used the buffer considered by Alexandre and others when they developed these conditional loss models. And it was 100 meters. So I used 100 meters because the model used to predict the conditional loss was considering this buffer. But if you go to the references, you will see that it will go between 30 to 60, according to COIN 2008.
Great, thank you. Well, we're at the end of the hour here, so we should wrap up. Fermin, I want to thank you again. Great presentation. And for anybody who wants to review, we'll share the recording, and I'll also include references in that email so that you can find all those and get the details. So I hope to you guys join on a future webinar. And again, thank you so much, Fermin, and I appreciate everybody for participating.
Hey, you are welcome. Thank you very much.